Decarbonization Disruptor podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen. Thank you for joining me. This is episode 3 of our podcast, and I am very happy to welcome Rahul Shendure. Rahul is the CEO of CarbonBuilt. CarbonBuilt is an innovative cleantech startup which focuses on technology that enables concrete producers to replace traditional cement by capturing and using CO2 during the manufacturing process to produce concrete that has 70 to 100% less carbon than traditional concrete. It's also important to note that Rahul and I share a common link by both being graduates of the prestigious Solon High School here in the great state of Ohio. Rahul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be with you today.
No, I really appreciate it. I wanted to definitely get into CarbonBuilt during the call and understand more about your experience there. I wanted to first start with kind of your career journey, because I saw that, being a graduate of Harvard, MIT, one would call that decent education, right? You could do pretty much anything with your career. What made you decide to evolve your career into the clean tech space and take that route?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think going back to where you started this, my journey begins before that, really in the same Cleveland suburb you're sitting in, and I was the child, I'm firmly in Gen Z. I'm a child of immigrants that came to Solon, because they wanted their kids to have as good of an education as they could get, and but during that time period, unsurprisingly. By the middle of high school, I was pretty firmly left of center, kind of anti-Reagan for whatever reason, one might think of as a 9th or 10th grader. And for me, that really manifested itself in the environmental movement, and really not about climate at the time. It was definitely more about pollution, spotted owl, save the whale sort of stuff that you'd expect. I expect more out of 9th and 10th graders today, but at the time I was not super sophisticated. So, so that was kind of where my energy was. I was a math and science geek, and that all pointed me towards engineering and chemical engineering in particular as a something to study to help make a contribution to sorting out some of the messes we've created. And went to work out of undergrad, decided not to go into academia or grad school, went straight to work in the plastics industry with General Electric, trying to really clean up water pollution, air pollution problems in big chemical production plants. And it did not take long for me to realize that was not how I wanted to spend my life. So, kind of 12 months in, I was looking for a different way to accomplish some of the same objectives. And the nice thing about GE was it allowed you to, if they had plenty of routes for people they brought in on an engineering track or a finance track or an HR track or an IT track to move around. And so I took full advantage of that and discovered there that I really enjoyed the day-to-day practice of business more than engineering, and that that shift also for me coincided with understanding that climate was really the defining, not just environmental problem, but the defining problem of our time and my time, and really a desire to not only shift from doing technical work to business work, but also shifting from a focus on kind of the problems of the past to a focus on climate, and business school really allowed me to do that then, is sort of make the pivot that I wanted to make. And since then, with one exception, it's been all the commercial side of climate tech for me. So hopefully that paints a picture for you.
No, it definitely does. And I saw that, that allowed you to become really a early stage investor in a lot of companies. In fact, I was looking, I saw Clarity Movement was one of the companies that you've invested in. In fact, just as a teaser, David Liu is going to be on the podcast, I think, in a few weeks. So as one of the co-founders there, so excited to have him. And so what I was curious about, given I know a lot of the names of the companies that you've invested in, and what's your process in deciding what verticals within clean tech that you decide to invest in? And when you look at a company, how do you evaluate their technology, its viability, and whether it has legs to stand on and make a difference in the environment?
Yeah. So I'll caveat all this by saying I don't consider myself an active investor right now. I spent dabbled a bit, and then spent a year uh, after the acquisition of my last company and starting CarbonBuilt, where I was really focused on investing. Since starting CarbonBuilt, it's been 150% my time going into this, and I'm trying to keep tabs on the investments, but not, I would say, doing it very actively today. That said, I do have a thesis for that, for that time and those decisions that I'm happy to share with you. So for me, my investing focus was really part of an exercise for me of trying to decide what I wanted to do next, and there was some probability that was going to be raising a fund and moving more to the investment side of things, and so I tried to just practice that. That was like a way for me to decide if that's what I was interested in doing. I was writing relatively small checks. I made a decision up front that was counter to, I think, some folks that had similar background to me that raised funds, and they raised those funds and decided to invest in a relatively small number of companies but take very active roles. And as I thought about what made sense to me, it was almost, some of it is born by my experience in the space, was a different path, which was investing more broadly, making smaller investments, recognizing that if you want to get in with a good valuation, which we all know is kind of critical to seeing returns that are interesting, you've got to do it at a time where you don't have a lot of information to go on. You know who the founder is. You can have some intuition about the challenge in that space, and you've got to make a decision pretty quick, and you're probably not going to have the ability to be coaching or mentoring or really digging in and analyzing beforehand. And I think hopefully my experience has allowed me to be a little bit better than the average person in making those calls. Time will tell. But that was sort of the approach I took in going in. It's sort of I've been around climate tech long enough to have a sense for what were places that could be interesting as an investment, and what are places that seemed like train wrecks waiting to happen. And then you layered on top of that is the founder and the founding story, and what their stated strategy was, recognizing that was probably going to change, and then just having the commitment to invest broadly. And so I think I don't really keep track, but it's probably like 35, 40 climate related investments, and some of those have gone under already, but there's a handful that are would return the fund on paper, and so now we just let it ride and see how it plays out.
I'm always curious, talking to the people in the investment space or just founders in generally. Do you weigh more heavily the founders and the people and investing in them and their idea, or do you look more at what they've already come up with in their technology and kind of putting your money behind, or in your time behind what they've come up with?
Yeah, and to be clear, in this case, this is really a little bit of money. It's not really much time, because I'm not making, investment sizes I was making were not going to hugely move the needle. In some cases, people were excited to have a little bit of my background, being able to help provide feedback. But mostly, I think I was looking at it as investment opportunities where I would have the conviction to move quickly, or say no quickly, right? I mean, that's both things, just because of my experience. And I don't think, it's kind of like getting advice from a book about your kid or something. You get all you want, but there's no one framework here, I think, that would ever make sense to apply. Maybe it's different if you're at a venture firm, you've raised money under a certain thesis, and you have to stick with that thesis because that's part of the drill. If you're investing your own capital or kind of independent with much more flexibility, I think it's actually more important to have the situational awareness to know when it's different. I have certain investments in my portfolio that are markets and industries that I swore I would not invest in, but they were started by founders that had a track record, and I'm not sure if they'll work out to be, the risk is still high very long term, but the founder had a demonstrated track record of one way or another, whether it's acquisition or finding a way to grow the company so that it was in a position to take advantage of markets opening up when they did. They've returned, they've got a track record in these spaces of delivering, and in those cases, I was able to put aside my overall conviction in the broader challenges in the marketplace and make a commitment. And I would my two best performing investments on paper fit that bill. It's on paper, so it doesn't count for anything right now, but it is interesting, I think.
So now that you've moved to spend 150% of your time with CarbonBuilt, I definitely have lots of questions about it. I talked a little bit about it, the technology in the intro, but I wanted to nail down kind of what the revolutionizing sort of sizzle of the technology is, and how it's going to revolutionize production of concrete.
Yeah. So let me maybe start with just a touch of context here on the market and the problem. So concrete is uh, the second most used material by humankind, second to water. So I think we just take it for granted, right? Unless you're in this business and you start noticing everywhere it's used. Just take a half a day, and just try to, as you go about your business, try to pay attention to concrete's use, and it's pretty breathtaking, actually. So one is this, as a scale of a material, there's nothing really like it. Concrete is composed of sand, mostly sand and rock, and 10 to 15% of it is Portland cement, which is kind of magic ingredient that acts as the glue that holds the rock and sand together. Portland cement is made by heating limestone and clay up to very, very, very high temperatures. And two things happen when you do that. One is, to get those high temperatures, you generally have to burn coal. So you have a release of CO2 from burning the coal. And then one of the reactions in making that heat stimulates is limestone or calcium carbonate turning into calcium oxide. And if you just do your ninth grade chemistry on that, the thing you're losing when you do that is CO2. So you got this double whammy of a fundamental chemistry of the cement making process, and then the fact that we basically need coal to make it today. So that makes it kind of pound for pound, or if you said amount of CO2 released per dollar of value, it's in a league of its own, right? Even more so than the other hard to abate materials like steel or fuels. And that's basically all of concrete's carbon footprint comes from the production of this enabling ingredient. Okay, so with that as context, there are many ways to solve this problem, and there are people working on all these ways all around the world, right? You can solve it upstream. You can try to get rid of, you can try to produce cement in totally different ways. You could produce it the same way, but capture the CO2 that comes out of the smokestack. You could try to produce it using more and more biomass instead of coal. Lots of different things you can do upstream. You could also just use less cement in making concrete and find other materials you could use there. So lots of ways, people working on all of them. In the end, they have different levels of, this is a commodity. And there's, one thing everyone should appreciate about commodities is that cost is the only thing that matters, right? If you're not focused on cost when you're making a commodity, you're destined to have a small niche business that is maybe cool, but very small. So with that, all these approaches have different levels of capital impact, I would say. So some of them are marginal in nature. Some of them are, can decarbonize completely or even go carbon negative, but they have different levels of capital intensity. They have different levels of operating costs. They have different technical risks, right? Some are science projects in the lab today, and others are being in the field. So we need a portfolio. There's no silver bullet here, but I think that's all context for what I'm about to say in terms of what we do. So with CarbonBuilt, I mean, in some ways, this was, my decision to spin this company out of UCLA and partner with the scientific founder here was part and parcel my transition from largely working on higher risk technologies over my career. Almost everything has been more of a science project, and it's some combination of getting older and we're just wanting to have more line of sight, greater line of sight to seeing the thing I was working on show up in customers' hands on an expedited time frame. Um, that was really my motivation, and then so that leads us to what CarbonBuilt does, which is really focus on a near-term solution that can be highly impacting and cost competitive, but deliver today. And so what we do is we enable existing concrete producers to produce the same products, meeting the same specs that they do today, at selling at the same price they do to their same customers with considerably less Portland cement than is used today. And that is our vehicle for decarbonizing concrete. And we think it's the right combination of ingredients, or ingredients is not the right word here, but kind of elements of the solution to allow us as humanity to make a rapid change on this front. Is it the only solution we'll need? No. And could it be obsoleted in 20, 30, 40 years because we come up with something better? Sure. But like I said, we're motivated to see real change in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that means integrating with the existing production infrastructure, taking advantage of materials that exist today at volume, and delivering a clear economic return to people who are in the value chain today without incentives. Right? That all that stuff is required if you want to accomplish that goal I talked about. So I'm happy to get into more details if you want.
No, I was curious. And that was super helpful. What I was really curious about when I did my research and kind of learn more about the technology is its application, because the technology talks a lot about the curing process and the production process of the low carbon concrete. As an example, my house in Ohio is a newer house, and it's solid poured foundation, right? And so, are we talking about technology that can allow for that type of building? Is it more concrete blocks? Can you build a 20-story building in the solid poured concrete foundation using technology? I want to get an idea of the applications in the real world for this.
Great. So we are. Let me start by what we're focused. So today we are producing ultra low carbon concrete blocks. That's the 8x8x16 hollow concrete block that is, you'd see if you went to Home Depot. You'd see in lots of applications, but is not your poured foundation. And let me maybe take a step back from that and just kind of set up how we see the application space in concrete. Because again, I think unless you're paying attention to it, or you're in the construction industry, most people I think don't have a sense for this. So within concrete, I would carve it up into 4 categories product wise. You've got dry cast, precast products. Those would be things like blocks and pavers and retaining wall segments. These are basically made at a factory. They're made very locally, right? You don't transport these materials 500 miles or 1,000 miles away. It's 50, 100, 150 miles max. So there are lots of plants making these products spread out all over, anywhere there's people in cities, right? And then second category would be dry mix. So this is the powder in bags you buy, Quickcrete or Sackcrete, when you go to Home Depot and you want to fill, you're doing a driveway or you want to fill post holes for your fence. That's category number 2. Category number 3 would be the broader precast market. So these are things made with a wet cast slurry. So the same kind of consistency you see coming out of the back of a concrete truck, mixing truck. But that concrete flows into molds, still in a kind of centralized factory setting. It's then, it hardens and then it's shipped to wherever it's going to be used. So lots and lots of products, pipes, lots of more and more modular construction. Stuff's being made this way offsite and then shipped to the finished place. Sometimes it's precast on site and then just sort of moved into place there. And then the last
all the retaining walls on 480 West, when the construction, you see basically during construction process when they put the concrete blocks to block off traffic. You're talking about that type of
That actually, if it's
manufacturing process.
blocks like that, then depending on how big they are, it's probably the first category, but it could be the second. It's a bigger, if they're really big blocks, like the 3 feet by 3 feet by 5 feet kind of blocks. Those are, yeah, that would exactly be this kind of stuff. And then the last one is cast in place, right? That's the one where you've got wood forms in a building, a skyscraper, and you got lots of concrete trucks that show up on site, and they're filling up those forms, probably floor by floor, because they want it to harden, and then they put on the next floor. So that's and definitely by volume, right? It's most of the volume in this country and most in the world is the latter, right? That's where if you're doing highways and things like that, it's also the same. There's a much greater technical challenge in decarbonizing in that order as you go through that order I talked about. So part of why we're focused on block is not that the technology isn't extensible to those other things, but it's just the easiest, right? It's the easiest for us to deliver technically. It's the easiest for us to deliver economic value out of the gate. And the climate doesn't care, right? Which of those things you got cement out of, it's all the same. So our view is there's no benefit to the planet by taking on the hardest challenge, right? That maybe you feel good about it as that you're taking on something hard. I've done plenty of trying to take on the hard thing, but from a climate standpoint, we should be decarbonizing the things that are easiest to decarbonize first, and blocks and pavers and retaining walls that are made, these dry cast ones are easier. We've got a product pipeline that we'll work through, but we're really focused on delivering economic value to customers because we think that's what's going to drive growth, and that will drive us to be sustainable and cash flow positive as a company very quickly. And from there we can build on things, right? So, and a lot of this comes from, I've been a part of multiple companies with platform technologies that raised a lot of money and tried to do too many things up front, and didn't do as good of a job on any one of them as they could have, and suffered as a result. So we're right or wrong, we're taking a different approach here and trying to stay focused on, it's fine if it's the unsexy parts of the market, like I said.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it makes sense, right? I mean, if you can do it in a controlled environment, then you probably have a better chance of
Totally.
being able to do
We
it
can
at scale.
test, everything that gets sent out, our customers can test. I mean, it's destructive test, but the point is, there's a lot. It's a lot easier to test and validate. Whereas if you go to the ready mix cast in place side of things, you test that after it's been poured, right? So the conservatism that will be there and the risk tolerance is inherently lower. And no one is actually going to take risks, but you're trying to do something new. So putting it into implementation, being able to test it at the factory is a huge, huge enabler.
Well, I'm always curious about too, that the industry you're talking about, even the manufactured, concrete sectors. I mean, I imagine these are industries that have largely been unchained for multiple decades, right? So, what headwinds, if any, have been there to get these companies to get their heads around the idea of changing their manufacturing process they've done, forever, and going with a low carbon solution, which I imagine that they want. So they want to be sustainable, but yet they would definitely have to change how they produce their product. What issues have come up, if any, in making that switch in their minds to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of headwinds, right? I think for most part, people don't change unless there's a really good reason to. And there's yeah, you're right. Like decades more, right? I mean, many of these businesses are family-run businesses. Our biggest producer here in the Pacific Northwest has been, the business has been in that family for more than 100 years, right? So and there is a huge reluctance to change when no one is forcing it to them. So our perspective on this, coming back to the fact that it's a commodity and cost is king, is first and foremost, like across, not just in concrete and cement, but across climate intensive material, sectors of the economy when they need to change. It's just taken as conventional wisdom that sustainability means more expensive, right? And so the biggest thing we can do to overcome people's reluctance here is flip that and show them that, and particularly this is important in a business that has very low margins, right? If we can make the product the same cost, so it can be sold at the same price, or even better, make it a little bit cheaper, so that they can materially improve their small margins. Now you've got a forcing function on this that has nothing to do with sustainability. And you're right. I think all other things being equal, anyone, no matter if they're in Seattle, Washington, or Central Alabama, which is where our first plant is, will prefer sustainable product over non-sustainable product. But if there's any concern that it's going to be more expensive and profits are going to go down, or we've got to charge a premium, or that we can't meet specification, or there's some change in the color or the weight, right? Those all become barriers. And so that's really why I'm excited about the solution we've come up with, because it is no compromise on all the other factors that are there. It expands margins for the producer in a way that compensates them for making this change, right? They're going to do something different. They ought to get something for it, especially if you want them to move quickly, which is what we want them to do. And it is materially decarbonizing. We don't have religion in our company on like, it's got to be 50% or 70% or 100% or carbon negative. We have religion on cost, because we believe that if as long as it's not 5% or 10%, right? It's a materially lower carbon footprint, that if we can make the economics work, that's what's going to drive growth, and that will allow us to deliver greater total impact, if that makes sense, right? Because the total impact is going to be decarbonization on the product times the number of products, right? Or the mass of the product. And so you need to push on both of those. So if you have something that's super carbon negative, but it costs twice the amount, it's useless.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I wanted to get your take, now that you've been in this business for a few years and obviously your clean tech background, just sort of generally the future of industrial level decarbonization, because you're using carbon capture in a very practical way. And we're seeing a lot more companies come online that claim to do carbon capture, whether they're trying to put it in something like you are, or they're trying to do it generally. Is carbon capture sort of the next stage of large scale decarbonization? And if not, I mean, what technologies do you see on the horizon that we should be getting behind it? And I agree, you said something earlier, there is no silver bullet. You have to do everything. But what do you see as prevalent that we can do at scale that can really lead us into a much larger decarbonization movement?
Yeah. So on the carbon capture side, I think actually we don't actually do carbon capture in the way, I think it's traditionally what that means is you've got a stack that's producing CO2 at 10 to 20% of what's coming out of that stack is CO2. Usually it's at very high volumes, and you are intervening to capture that CO2 and concentrate it up to something that is close to pure, so it can be transported or put underground. Okay, that is certainly, I think, going back to the cement industry, an area that is got a huge amount of focus. Not really sort of breakthrough technologies. It's just expensive at large scale. So it's hard for any company to decide to do unless they're being forced to do it, or they've got a huge incentive to do it. And it's going to be happening here in the U.S., more so in Europe, I think, and with different approaches. So Europe has a stick kind of bias on their incentives, right? Regulatory requirements that are going to force cement makers and other big heavy industry to do carbon capture, and they have to do it across the board. So that way, everyone invests because they don't have a choice, and they're not at a competitive disadvantage because all their competitors need to invest as well. in the U.S., thanks to the Infrastructure Bill and Inflation Reduction Act, we're taking the carrots approach. So big grants, tax credits, and we'll see, right? I mean, uh, I am skeptical about the pace that this will all play out at, because these are just large dollar expenditures that need to be made. You're not going to be doing all your plants at once. So you'll do one, and that's going to take permitting and piloting and trialing, and then you'll try to do a few more. And I mean, I'd like to think of it happening quickly, but I don't, whether you're in Europe or here, we don't have the kind of industrial policy that will make it on a government level and a country level that would make it happen quickly. And I don't think we're not willing to we shouldn't, cede our democracy to the kinds of structures, China that might give you a shot at doing it quickly, but that comes at obviously a price that isn't really appropriate. Um, so I think that's the challenge for carbon capture writ large. Now we do use CO2 as one of our ingredients, and that's kind of I think what you were getting at. This happens though at a
Right.
much smaller scale. So I wouldn't call what we do carbon capture. It's really just taking waste CO2, whether that's coming from fossil sources at the plant or something we bring to the table. That could be biomass, like waste biomass combusted, like we're doing in our first plant, or the product of small scale direct air capture systems that either are on site or located nearby with the CO2 transported. So yeah, CO2 is one of the ingredients we're using to replace cement. Uh, it has to go with a bunch of dry ingredients as well. Then that's really the secret sauce for us is those materials that are available broadly, inexpensively, and at large scale that we can combine with CO2 at the plant. So I think then stepping back for your broader question, I think it's we are, again, not to just beat a dead horse, we are going to have to do all of these things. I think the challenge is going to be finding situations where the economics alone, right, or with incentives that are already in place, can make things happen. And I think one of the challenges we're finding with 45Q, not in all cases obviously, but in many, is that it's just not enough. Actually, when you look at the actual costs of getting these large scale projects done versus the 45Q credit, it helps, but it doesn't make the cost go away. And so, I'm optimistic. We've got enough innovators out there right now. There's been a lot of venture capital in the space. So some combination of big companies knowing they need to do this and looking for their first trials and not pilots but sort of large scale implementations, combined with lots of innovators out there that the U.S. is, I think, uniquely positioned to combine innovation and scale in a way that even Europe, I think, struggles to do. And I certainly remain optimistic that we could figure this out. But it would all be a lot easier with large scale industrial policy that we have had as a nation from time to time, and as we all know, is tough to do in the political environment we're in these days. So. Yeah, that would be the big game changer. I'm not sure is there a single technology or a couple that I think clearly rise above out of this? I don't know. These are hard problems to solve, and we're up against the baseline industry. The incumbent has decades, century plus um, of experience curves that they've that they can take advantage of assets that have been already written off and they're no longer paying for, and lots of subsidies that are sort of embedded in our tax code and otherwise. So we need this more progress on all that stuff would be great. We've got a great start on that with the Inflation Reduction Act, and hopefully all that stuff will stay in place because people recognize the huge job creation benefits that that have been created as a result. And but that will remain to be seen.
No, I appreciate the insight on that. I mean, I've been in the sustainability space for 12 years now, and I think every day I'm excited, optimistic, and concerned all at the same time every day. And so I think that hit on the nail what you were saying.
Yeah, that's very, very reasonable, and I think no one should lose their sense of, you wouldn't want to have enough optimism that you lose your sense of urgency or sense of crisis on this. Like this is, it's I think unreasonable to think about over the course of our lifetimes or even our kids' lifetimes or solving climate change, right? We are really in a race to mitigate the both the expected outcome as well as the worst case outcomes, and we need all this stuff to do that.
Great. Well, no, listen, I really appreciate your time in doing this. I always feel more knowledgeable after every episode than I did before, which is always good for our listeners. So, in closing, I just wanted to see if you want to say anything about what's coming up with you, with CarbonBuilt, that our audience should know and get excited about.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're as a company, we're definitely, we're really in growth mode. So I think keep an eye out for. We're producing in one plant today, and that number will go up. And I'm excited to announce when CarbonBuilt ultra low carbon concrete is available in other geographies beyond Alabama. And we are hiring. So I think if you go to our LinkedIn page, you'll see roles posted there, and certainly expect that to continue.
Well, no, again, I thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. If you ever make back Northeast Ohio, hit me up. We're here all the time. And again, appreciate you giving insight. So this is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast, and we will see you next time.